Okay, so css.lint.unknownVendorSpecificProperties. This is pretty much the same thing as the previous one. It's just with vendor-specific prefixes, right? So, and by default, this is set to ignore. Let me show you what this looks like. And there we have it. This is a property that doesn't exist, so VS Code is not aware of that. And it's ignoring the fact that it doesn't know about this property. I think that, like I explained in the previous video, first there's a specification draft, right, on the CSS spec, and then browsers will try to implement that functionality with vendor prefixes and to test things out, see if it's working, test out the performances of that new feature. And once it's implemented, you no longer need to use vendor prefixes, right? So that being the order of how things occur, it's safe to assume that VS Code knows about all the properties that CSS has because they appear on the spec first, right? So an unknown vendor-specific property is probably an error. I wouldn't ignore this one. I would set it as an error, and it would show up like this, right? Now, if for some reason VS Code is behind, like I said in the last video about this property right here, it's the same thing. If for some reason VS Code is not aware of a property that it should be, you can just add it here until an update comes. But you know, that's a very fringe situation. So my advice is to set this to error. Also, having an error here is very helpful because of this. Let me show you. So we have the transition property here, and as you can see, only the ms vendor prefix has an error, and the error is this is unknown vendor specific property. Now, a lot of you might find this strange, but it actually makes sense. The transition property only needs if I mean, you know, currently it doesn't need, but just for the sake of example, it never needed the ms transition property because I can show you here that there are only two Microsoft browsers, Internet Explorer and Edge always supported the transition property. By the way, this is transition property, and Internet Explorer did not support and then supported. So, you know, fully supported. Has with Chrome, for example, when you have these minuses here, it supports, but you need a prefix, as you can see there, right? The WebKit prefix, and then it doesn't need it, the prefix anymore. And currently, only the Opera Mini is not capable of supporting the transition property, not even with a prefix, right? So it's very useful to have this set to error, or at least warning, so that you know that you don't have extra code here that doesn't really make any sense. And this happens a lot with prefixes, and I've seen developers just use the 4 prefixes, you know, willy-nilly when it's really not necessary. And transition is one of those that does not have the Microsoft vendor prefix.